This is the extraordinary, untold story of soldiers' photography in the First World War. These might look like professional photos, but they were all taken by ordinary British and German soldiers on personal cameras they took with them to war. Today, much of our understanding of what the war looked like comes from reconstructed battle scenes and iconic, yet impersonal, official photographs, like this one. But by exploring the personal photos taken by the soldiers themselves, many never seen before in public, we'll present a new and unexpected picture of the frontline experience. This is World War I, viewed from the perspective of the men who fought in it.
Looking into the eyes of these men, almost to see what they were thinking, what's going to happen to them. It's that connection with another human being through the medium of that photograph, which is extremely important in my view.
We'll find out how the effects of war were reflected in the photos the soldiers took.
War is an adventure for a young boy. But I think when he made this picture, he was no boy anymore, he was a man.
And with no veterans alive to tell the tale, we'll join the relatives of some of these men as they go in search of the stories hidden within their ancestors' photographs.
From the pictures we have, this does seem that this is the last picture that your grandfather took, not only on the Somme, but during the Great War.
Now, we reveal for the first time the secret history of amateur photography in the First World War, and of the men behind the cameras. The First World War was a bloody and brutal conflict. But when it began in August 1914, it was, to many, a time of great excitement. For the soldiers of Britain's regular army and the tens of thousands of idealistic new recruits who volunteered to fight, war seemed like a great adventure. A chance to join friends and colleagues in a once-in-a-lifetime trip overseas, to give the Germans a bloody nose, and to return victorious. And as a wave of patriotism swept across the country, many were determined to record their part in history in photographs, both as a personal reminder and as a souvenir to show family and friends when they returned. Few were prepared for the horrors to come. By the outbreak of war, amateur photography was already a popular pastime in Britain. The launch of the 5-shilling Kodak box Brownie in 1901 had made cameras affordable to the masses. So by 1914, many people were in the habit of preserving their memories with an informal snapshot. But it was the introduction of a new and sophisticated folding model in 1912 that really paved the way for soldiers' photography in the First World War.
Now, this little camera was one of the most popular cameras of the time. Indeed, it became so popular with soldiers that it became known as the soldier's Kodak. It was called the vest pocket Kodak, vest being the American name for a waistcoat. And it was designed to be small enough to slip into a waistcoat pocket, or of course, the tunic pocket of your jacket. When a soldier wanted to take a photograph, this is what they would have to do. Firstly, they would have to pull out the lens panel. On the front, you have settings where you can change the shutter speed and the aperture, depending on how bright the day was. You could either have 1/50th of a second for a bright sunny day, or 1/25th if it was a bit more cloudy. You would choose the setting, and then you could change the aperture from a distant landscape through to a portrait setting, and then take the photograph looking down into the viewfinder.
The vest pocket Kodak, known as the VPK, wasn't the only folding camera available, but it was the most popular. Within a year, over 30,000 had been sold in Britain. At 30 shillings apiece, 4 times the weekly wage of an ordinary soldier, it wasn't cheap, so most sales were made to officers rather than privates. Given the camera's popularity, it's a mystery that so little is known about the photographs the soldiers took with them. But in time, many of these men would want to forget the horrors they'd seen. So pictures and albums were shut away in cupboards and attics, and eventually forgotten. One private soldier who did take a vest pocket camera to war was William Smallcombe, who volunteered for the 12th Battalion of the Gloucestershire Regiment in 1914. The photographs he took have been handed down to his grandson, Michael, himself a professional photographer.
This is a picture of my grandfather, which I took. He was about 90, in his mid-90s, and he lived at our house. William Albert Smallcombe, looking very dapper there, I think.
William died in 1992. And although Michael had seen his grandfather's photographs before, he didn't know much about them, because William rarely spoke about the war.
These are the small imprints which come from the camera. They're tiny, they're differently exposed, and actually quite difficult to see what's in a lot of them. This is William with his machine gun, and I imagine, you know, if you have a machine gun, you point it at people, and some of them fall over. So that's what he did, but would never talk about. You could see that what interested him were his friends, but it's very poignant that you know that a lot of these people who are with your grandfather, who you knew, never came back. I mean, I'd like to know more about these pictures and where they were photographed. Places have a spirit, I think, probably, which comes from the experience of whatever happened there. And I'd like to, you know, experience that, to find it.
Like many soldiers' photo collections, the secrets to William's story may be hidden in the pictures he took. So it's shocking to discover that countless numbers of soldiers' photos have ended up as landfill, thrown away, unwanted, as the generation of veterans who took them began to pass away. One man who salvaged some of it is ex-dustman Bob Smethurst, who worked on the bins in Lingfield in Sussex. 6 of Bob's ancestors died in the war, so it's always been a subject close to his heart.
This is all the stuff, or some of the stuff, I picked up over the years of being on the refuge and rescued, I suppose, in a sense, from a military medal to photographs. Though some of my colleagues thought I was totally mad, but I said that about a colleague who collected fishing tackle, and I thought he was mad. And this is just a part of the stuff that was thrown away over the 36 years I was a refuge collector.
Bob began his World War I photo collection in the 1970s, in the days before black plastic bin bags, when dustmen could see the rubbish they'd tipped into the back of the dust cart.
In them days, we used to carry the rubbish on our shoulders, and therefore when we emptied the bins, you used to see the paperwork coming out. And with the photographs, you know, you didn't find them all the time, because, I mean, the only time you was aware of some is when they started being mashed up in the back.
Bob's most treasured find is a large collection of amateur photos taken in 1914 by a soldier in the London Scottish Regiment. Rare because they're the only known photographs of the battalion before their first action in October that year.
This is Sergeant Haig, the 14th London Scottish, who took the photographs. And there's a photograph here of German prisoners, and you can actually see him taking the shadow of him taking the photograph in the picture. I mean, all I am is a custodian of this stuff for future generations, because if we threw it all away, this stuff perishes, and we'd be like the Romans. You'd be digging up in years' time, like, you know, doing that. Well, I thought I'd save them the trouble by collecting it now.
Although many albums and photographs have been lost forever, there are families who cherish the images taken by previous generations. Fred Davidson was a 25-year-old doctor in the 1st Battalion of the Cameronians, and amongst the first wave of soldiers to take a camera to war. The albums he made were left to his grandson, Andrew, and he's just spent a year painstakingly researching his grandfather's story.
For me, this was a very personal project because I had the albums, but I knew nothing about the man. He died 2 days after I was born. But what he kept were these 3 photo albums, and I think they obviously meant a lot to him because they covered an extraordinary period of his life.
Fred set sail for France with Britain's regular army, the British Expeditionary Force, on the 13th of August 1914. Just over a week after the war had begun.
The first photograph of my grandfather at war is taken on the boat, the SS Caledonia, that took them across from Southampton to Le Havre. They look like they're 3 or 4 guys having fun. One of them's dangling a camera, and they're taking photos of each other in full knowledge that they are creating a pastiche of if they're going on a cruise, which is extraordinary to think of when we know what happened after.
The battalion arrived at the French port of Le Havre on the 15th of August. This photograph of their disembarkation was taken by Fred's good friend, machine gun officer Robert Money. Within days, the men of the British Expeditionary Force were heading towards the Belgian town of Mons, in search of the German army. But by the 24th of the month, they were in full retreat, overwhelmed by enemy forces. Robert Money was one of the few British soldiers to take photographs during this time.
There's a terrific photo of the men resting when they're being chased back by the Germans, and they're all sprawled out on the grass, and you can see Robertson, the commanding officer, sitting cross-legged, cigarette in his mouth, looking dazed, straight at the camera. Beside him, his number 2, Vandeleur, has got binoculars pointing up at the sky. They're looking at the German plane that follows them every mile they march.
After a few weeks on the move, the battalion entered hastily dug trenches, initially here, near the tiny French village of La Boutellerie, close to the Belgian border. And as the war settled into a deadly battle of attrition, Fred and Robert Money began to document their experiences. At that time, Secretary of State for War, Lord Kitchener, had banned the press from following the movements of the BEF. So soldiers' photographs provide the only visual record of the British front line during this period of the war.
There's a lot of mud, there's a lot of guns. You're starting to feel that there's real fighting going on, not just a retreat. Some of my favorite photos are the group shots, where you can see my grandfather's assembled fellow officers, almost like a football team. And I think these are remarkable photos because by this stage, although they're on the front line, everyone is buying into the idea of a group photo. They want to be seen together, they want to remember each other, they want this to remind them of what they went through.
In those first few months of the war, photographers like Fred Davidson and Robert Money were making up the rules of war photography as they went along. However, one enthusiastic soldier drew up a set of simple guidelines, later published in Amateur Photographer magazine, which suggested a little common sense was all that was required.
It's an article written by Medico, somebody who'd been invalided back from the front, and it's called Photography at the Front, Some Practical Notes by One Who Has Been There. It starts off here. Don't flourish your camera in the faces of generals. Cameras are not popular at the front, and you might find yourself minus your camera. Don't use all your film on the voyage out. Save some of it for later. You might get better ones. This temptation, it was so exciting that you would use all your film before you even landed in France. And lastly here, don't take a photograph that could be of help to the enemy. If you were captured, would you have photographs that could aid them?
Unfortunately, by the time the article was published in March 1915, the rules had changed. That's because some soldiers' photos had begun to appear uncensored in the papers back home, like this one of Robert Money's, which was published in the War Illustrated in November 1914. It's not known how much Robert Money was paid for the image, but the market for soldiers' photographs was beginning to open up. And when the authorities found out, they acted immediately.
Now, Sir John French, the Commander-in-Chief, knows that something has to be done. And on the 22nd of December 1914, he issues a General Routine Order 464 saying that photographs were no longer permitted. Now, the problem with the GRO is that it's a local fix, local to the Western Front. No officer or other rank about to embark for France would have been aware of that ban.
But despite the ban, Fred Davidson and Robert Money, photographed here together, continued to document their war.
It's about control. That being in this war, especially after the retreat, there was a feeling amongst a lot of the soldiers that they'd lost control. You know, that every decision is made for them by the army, and some of those decisions aren't very good. Even the officers felt that. In taking photos, they're almost reasserting their own control over certain things. They are choosing what they remember. They are choosing to do something that the army doesn't want them to do, and they don't care.
In Germany, the High Command took a different view of photography. When war was declared, Kaiser Wilhelm immediately appointed 19 court photographers to document what was expected to be a swift and decisive victory. And for even the lowliest private soldier, recording the war through photographs was regarded not only as an enjoyable pastime, but also a patriotic duty.
If you get into the whole story of amateur photography from World War I, you get astonished about the gigantic amount of pictures which were produced. Photography for soldiers were not forbidden. It was not forbidden. They had to ask their next lieutenant or something like if they were allowed to take pictures. But I think if you think about the order in these trenches, nobody asks these questions because everybody was interested in photographs.
Within weeks of arriving at the front, many soldiers wrote home asking for a camera to be sent out. Such was the demand for cameras that nationwide schemes were set up by photography enthusiasts to ensure there were enough available.
One of these actions we know is from the German Photography Society. They asked their members to take cameras which were lying around at home and send them to soldiers for recording this world history.
One of those who would write home for his camera was Walter Kleinfeld, a boy soldier with a keen interest in photography.
Mein Vater war erst 16 Jahre alt, als sich freiwillig meldete. Weil erst so jung war, musste seine Mutter unterschreiben, dass überhaupt eingezogen werden durfte. Nachdem dann an der Front war, schrieb seiner Mutter, sie möge ihm eine Kamera schicken und die passenden Filme dazu. Ich habe volles Verständnis dafür, weil ich würde mir auch als erstes, wenn ich irgendwo hinkäme und keine Kamera dabei hätte, eine Kamera schicken lassen. Unser Lebensinhalt, wir müssen fotografieren, das ist uns ins Blut gegeben.
Like his father, Volkmar Kleinfeld has been taking photographs since he was a boy. And for over 40 years, has run this photography shop in the German town of Tübingen. A business first set up by his father in the late 1920s. Volkmar doesn't remember much about his dad, because he died when he was still a child. For many years, this home movie footage of them together in the 1930s was, along with his father's old war diaries, the only reminder. The photographs Walter took during the war were thought to have been lost. But then, just 3 years ago, Volkmar found a box containing over 120 glass plates stored in his father's archives. This is the first time the images have been seen in public.
Das sind Bilder meines Vaters, die in jungen Jahren gemacht hat. Und diese Diapositive, 126 an der Zahl, sind natürlich für mich ein toller Fundus gewesen. Ich habe mich riesig gefreut, weil damit das Werk meines Vaters, das da geschaffen hat, nun doch da gewesen ist und ausgewertet werden kann.
Volkmar showed the images to photography historian Dr. Ulrich Hegeler.
And I saw it immediately that these pictures are very special. Really special and really extraordinary. Walter Kleinfeld was 16, 17 years, but he have a view of photographer, of an old photographer, of a reporting photographer. And I think perhaps it was the easiest way for him to record the war, and for him and for his family, that they know at home what war is.
Meanwhile, back in the British lines, it had been just 3 days since the ban on photography was introduced, when an extraordinary event occurred which would seriously undermine the military authorities. On Christmas Day, 1914, along much of the 30-mile front line south of Ypres, there was an unofficial truce, as friend and foe put down their rifles, climbed out of their trenches, and met in no man's land. And over the next few hours, Tommy and Jerry shook hands, exchanged gifts, and significantly, photographed the event. In fact, if it weren't for the soldiers' photographs, no visual record of the Christmas truce would exist today.
Letters and diaries tell us of the extraordinary events of that day, but it's the actual photographs that prove that that fraternisation took place. Images of British officers and other ranks intermingling happily with the enemy are some of the most extraordinary documents of our time. Would the Christmas truce be remembered as it is today were it not for those photographs? I doubt it.
On the 8th of January 1915, photos of the event made the front pages. It was the last thing the authorities wanted.
These pictures caused a sensation in the British press. The government knew it was vital to keep the public full square behind the war effort. All of a sudden, people were going to look at these photographs and think, these people are not really any different from us, except for the colour of their uniform.
But the images of the Christmas truce only fueled the demand for soldiers' photos. And soon, British newspapers, which were red at the front, started to run competitions, offering vast sums of money for the best photographs.
There was a fear that soldiers would take their eye off the ball, that they would load, aim and shoot their cameras, as opposed to their revolvers and rifles. So it was critical that the government stood on this, what was effectively a press frenzy at that time. And on the 16th of March 1915, they introduced a War Office instruction that banned cameras completely. You would not be allowed to take photographs, you would not be allowed to take a camera overseas, you would not be allowed to have contact with the press. It finished photography in their minds at that point.
Anyone caught breaking the rules faced court-martial, as some discovered to their cost.
One individual, Private Ernest Mullis of the Gloucestershire Regiment, was caught with a camera in November 1915. He was given 3 months imprisonment with hard labour.
Whether Fred Davidson would have obeyed the new ban is unknown, because on the 13th of March, 3 days before it was introduced, he was shot in no man's land as he went over the top to help a wounded colleague. Although he was badly injured, Fred survived and was sent home to England to recover. From his hospital bed in Folkestone, he took perhaps his most important photograph of the war.
When he wakes up, he takes a photograph. The first photograph he takes when he recovers is of a beautiful nurse sitting at the end of the bed reading a magazine with a pot of pheasant-eyed daffodils and the sun streaming in. It is so different to what he's been photographing and where he's been. And you really feel that difference. And that's my favorite photo, because that nurse turned out to be my grandmother. You know, they ended up having a love affair and later married. So for my family, that is a photo that means everything and is really why we're here.
Meanwhile, on the Western Front, the new ban on photography was being taken seriously, and soldiers with cameras were hastily sending them home. 22-year-old Robin Gibbon Moneypenny was a second lieutenant in the Essex Regiment and had taken his camera to war. When the ban was introduced, he wrote home urgently to his Aunt Ethel, whom he lived with in England. Today, his daughter Sheila still has his letters.
There is a letter here dated March the 26th, 1915. It is from my father to my dear Aunt Ethel. Many thanks so much for your letters, and for the parcel of food and the underclothing, both of which I found on my arrival in billets this time. By the by, I am sending my camera home, as a strict order has just been issued that no officers are to have them. Any we've got, we must send home. Let me know when you get it. As she did get it, because, amazingly, we still have that camera here, the camera that my father actually took to France. And this is the camera, the VPK. It was called VPK, wasn't it? Because I remember that name. It looks to me quite a heavy one. It opens out. Ah, that's right, that looks familiar, yes. It's really lovely to have it still. After all these years, it's still with us.
The negatives that Robin Gibbon Moneypenny took with his vest pocket camera have only recently been discovered by the family, left undeveloped in an envelope. When they were processed, this is what they revealed. Sheila doesn't know why her father didn't want to see his photographs, but to her, they're a fascinating insight into his war.
It was extremely interesting to see them. It made it all become even more vivid and alive. You actually see the photographs taken on the spot. They're a remarkable record of his time in the war.
In the spring of 1915, many territorial battalions were preparing to leave Britain for the Western Front. These part-time volunteer soldiers were needed urgently to bolster the heavily depleted expeditionary force. And despite the risk of court-martial, some men still took cameras with them. Among them was Harry Culver, a second lieutenant in the 1st 5th Battalion of the York and Lancaster Regiment. This is him, caught on camera shortly before leaving for France. Historian John Cooksey has spent years researching the story behind his photographs.
What we have here is a record of the experiences of a unit, a territorial unit in the First World War, and of one man's desire to capture every single second of that.
The battalion arrived in France on the 14th of April and was dispatched to trenches near the village of Fleurbe. Once there, Harry Culver began to document their daily life in a collection of both informal and artistically posed photographs. Photos of such clarity and invention, they rank amongst some of the best soldiers' pictures of the war.
He's obviously got an eye for composition. He arranges the men quite purposefully into various poses, and he fills the frame with these men. He doesn't just want to record what they're doing, he wants to record it in an artistic fashion. And I think that comes through very, very strongly on many of the photographs.
Culver photographed all ranks, from the private soldiers who reported to him to his fellow junior officers. He even photographed his commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Fox, sitting him alongside the privates, revealing the informality that often existed amongst these part-time volunteer soldiers, something that was rarely seen in the regular army.
So it actually shows almost the equality in this unit and the camaraderie that exists between all ranks, not just between the officers or the men, but across the whole battalion. Of course, Culver shouldn't have been taking these photographs at all. But the fact that he did that and took so many photographs, and the fact that sometimes his commanding officer is quite a willing participant in these tableaux, meant that nobody was saying he couldn't do it. In fact, the contrary. I think he was encouraged to do it.
Initially, there was an optimism to Harry Culver's photography. But as his war progressed, all that would change. In the German army, photography continued to be championed, and books of soldiers' photos were sold on the home front to an enthusiastic audience. And there was no shortage of new, would-be photographers to satisfy the demand. In 1915, 16-year-old Walter Kleinfeld arrived on the Western Front as part of an artillery unit. And when his mother sent him a camera, he began taking the photographs that his son Volkmar recently found. His early images display an eye for subject and composition that belies his age.
Mein Vater war voller Ideale und das zeigt sich auch eigentlich in seinen Bildern, die sehr idealistisch und ästhetisch schön waren, selbst wenn es sich um Bilder handelt vom Kriegsgeschehen. Ich denke, dass es viele faszinierende Eindrücke waren, die er im Bild festhalten wollte. Er hat seine Kameraden fotografiert, wie sie am Geschütz im Unterstand sitzen oder wie sie mit der Gasmaske ausstaffiert sind. Es war rundum einfach für ihn als 16-, 17-Jährigen ein großes Abenteuer.
Like many soldiers' photographs, Kleinfeld's images show a fascination with friends, destruction, and the latest military equipment. But as his photography grew in confidence, he revealed an ability to look beyond the surface of the strange world around him.
This is one of the most impressive photographs which are remaining from Walter Kleinfeld. It's a tree which is completely destroyed by guns. And this expressive style of documentation, it's like a Dadaistic document. Why did he make this photograph, this motif? Perhaps he saw the symbol of this image, because you see no dead soldiers on the picture. You only see violence. And this is the importance.
This image was a sign that Walter Kleinfeld's photography was starting to change. By the autumn of 1915, Harry Culver's photographs had changed too. By then, promoted to captain, his battalion had spent weeks in trenches next to the Isère Canal, one of the most dangerous positions on the Western Front, where they'd suffered terrible casualties, and the psychological effects were beginning to tell. Culver's pictures from this period look blurred and overexposed, and the change in the men who'd once posed happily for his photos is plain to see.
Their uniforms seem to take on a different air. They start to wear scarves. They start to look a little bit more like brigands or pirates, if you like, in the trenches. their mood seems to change visibly from shot to shot. There's a sense of that 1,000-yard stare, that there's almost a blankness somewhere behind the eyes as they've starting to see too much of this war. They're starting to see death. They're starting to see destruction. I don't think Culver's meaning to record this, but this is just a byproduct of his cataloguing and recording the experiences of his men. And I often wonder whether that was having a telling effect, whether it was a condition having a telling effect on Culver as well. Was he beginning to sense that? Is the experience of war starting to tell on the men, but is it starting to tell on Harry Culver too?
On the 19th of December 1915, 23-year-old Harry Culver was in the trenches when the Germans launched a deadly new weapon, phosgene gas.
The shells land with a dull splash, is what all the records say. And I think take some of the men unawares until the release of the gas. Men start coughing and spewing and clutching their throats again. And Culver is completely overcome by the phosgene gas. And he dies of the effects of the phosgene. And that, in effect, brings to the end this great album of his great adventure, except for one final photograph, which, ironically, he never took. And he's on the other side of the camera, and that's the photograph of his grave. I really wanted this man to go on. I really wanted this man to come home. I'd seen it in his eyes. I'd seen the humour, I'd seen the pathos, I'd seen the care, I'd seen the humanity. But to see the finality of the grave, that really quite moved me. And the adventure had come to a tragic close.
"1916 would prove to be a significant year for photography in the First World War. By then, the army had a new commander-in-chief, General Haig, a man who recognized the importance of frontline photographs and who appointed Ernest Brooks as the army's first official photographer. In time, Brooks would capture some of the most iconic images of the war, like these dramatic silhouettes of soldiers on the skyline. But for him, the propaganda value of the image was key, and in contrast to many of the soldiers' own photos, the men he photographed were anonymous. Brooks' first main role was to photograph the build-up to the Battle of the Somme, the big push planned by Haig to break through the German lines. It would be the first real test for Britain's new volunteer army, over 1 million patriotic recruits who'd enlisted at the beginning of the war. Many had been formed into the so-called PALS battalions, fighting units made up of friends, neighbours and work colleagues who joined up together at local recruiting stations around the country. Among them was William Smallcombe, a machine gunner in the 12th Battalion of the Gloucestershire Regiment, known as Bristol's Own Battalion. Against all the rules, William photographed his war, photographs which have now been passed down to his grandson, Michael. Today, Michael has come to the Somme to see historian Richard van Emden, who met and interviewed William in the 1990s.
Well, I brought along some photographs. I've always been aware we have these pictures that he took in the trenches. And I think you know a bit more about them, so perhaps, you know, if we can have a look,
of course,
you could tell me something about them.
Well, what I remember when I spoke to William 20 years ago now, it's such a long time, but he showed me these photographs and I was taken with them immediately. These photographs are very rare because they're taken in 1916, so this is post-ban photography. But what's exceptional is the fact that William's a private. He's a private soldier with a camera. Now, I've spent a lot of time, I'm fascinated by the images taken by the soldiers in the Great War, and the vast majority are taken by officers. So to have a private's photographs through the Battle of the Somme is exceptionally rare. I mean, really rare.
Mostly taken before the battalion had seen action, there's an innocence and easygoing informality to many of William's photographs. But there are also clues within the images that hint at how surreptitiously they were obtained.
And what's interesting about these photographs is you don't see officers. There are no officers in these pictures. They're all taken when he's on his own with his mates.
People who are not going to give him away.
People he can trust. And that's crucial. And you see that with other ranks photographs. They're almost invariably taken when you're in a trench, nobody's there, whip your camera out, quick photograph, done.
The occasional blurred image might reveal the haste with which William took some of his photos. But he was always careful when obtaining new and illegal film.
The story William told me is that when he wrote home to his fiancée, well, later my grandmother, he would ask for a piece of cake, which meant that he wanted her to send him a film.
Right. Well, that's interesting in itself, because that suggests that must be prearranged. So when he goes to France at the end of 1915, he clearly knows there's a ban on cameras. You can't write home and say, my word for send me another film is piece of cake. So he must have known that and had that all set up.
All the letters would have been read by censors?
It would be a sample, so you would never know whether your letter would be read or not. So you couldn't take that chance. You couldn't have written home asking for that.
Right, I see. Talking to my grandfather, he told me sort of what happened behind the trenches, but he never really talked about the battles, any action. And I know you know more about it, so perhaps you tell me.
Yeah, well, I mean, he goes through the Battle of the Somme, and I'm not talking about going over the top once, he goes over more than that. And there is one photograph here that really stands out to me as being emblematic of what happened to the battalion, and this is this picture here.
Yeah, right.
And it's a picture taken of a grave, and I think that day changed William forever.
Really?
Yeah, really, really did.
Just 3 miles from where William took that photograph, on the other side of the Somme battlefield, was German boy soldier Walter Kleinfeldt. Today, his son Volkmar is making his first trip to the Western Front to see for himself some of the places where his father fought and took his photographs.
Ich habe lange Zeit in den Kriegstagebüchern von meinem Vater gelesen. Ich habe seine Feldpostbriefe gelesen und die Gegend ist mir fast ein wenig vertraut geworden dadurch. Aber ich war nie hier. Ich komme jetzt natürlich mit ganz großen Erwartungen und mit einer gewissen Spannung, was ich hier sehe.
For 7 days before the Battle of the Somme began, British artillery bombarded the German lines here, firing over 1.5 million shells along a 16-mile front in an attempt to destroy the enemy defenses. Walter Kleinfeldt had never experienced anything like it, and for a curious boy, it was an opportunity too good to miss. So in the heat of the bombardment, with his camera in hand, he peered out from a trench and by chance captured the exact moment a nearby church was hit. It's a photograph that has always intrigued his son, Volkmar.
Ich habe versucht, mich in meinen Vater hineinzudenken, wann das fotografiert hat. Man kann sich vorstellen, wenn da die Granate einschlägt, das gibt einen höheren Lärm, das blitzt, das ist laut. Drumherum sind Trümmer. Und das sind natürlich, das ist eine Kirche, das ist ein Gotteshaus und da schlägt eine Granate ein, das ist ja furchtbar.
The war was coming to Walter Kleinfeldt. The same day he took this photograph, the first man in his unit was killed. He wouldn't be the last. 6 days later, the Somme offensive began, as British soldiers went over the top, believing that the German defenses had been destroyed in the bombardment. But they were still intact. and the advancing Tommies ran straight into a hail of machine gun bullets and artillery fire. Walter Kleinfeldt and his artillery unit were in the thick of the action. They lost men and some guns, but by the end of the day had helped to repel the attack. Later, Kleinfeldt even found time to take this photograph of his gun crew and to write a postcard home to his mother, the card giving the merest hint of the ordeal he'd been through.
Ich bin immer noch kerngesund, allerdings durch die Aufregungen und Anstrengungen ziemlich heruntergekommen. Jetzt kann ich wenigstens noch mal sagen, dass ich im Krieg war. Seid nur unbesorgt um mich und regt euch nicht auf. Die englische Offensive ist überall zum Stehen gebracht. Das war heute ein großer Tag und ein richtiges Höllenfeuer.
But Kleinfeldt's apparent optimism would be short-lived as the British offensive continued. Over the coming days and weeks, he began to lose more and more friends. And as the war dragged on, his changing state of mind was reflected in his photographs.
Der Bildinhalt wird dann eigentlich drastischer, weil er fotografiert dann sehr realistisch, was passiert ist, auch wenn es nicht so schön anzusehen ist. Also der Krieg beginnt nun wirklich ernst zu werden.
His landscapes and portraits were replaced by stark photographs of the dead and dying, like this one he called After the Storm. It was rare for soldiers to photograph their dead countrymen, but Kleinfeldt was making a point.
And I think this is a very impressive picture, because there is no way to see any patriot or nationalistic or so aspect. All men are equal, and the death is for all men, it's the same thing. For me, it's a kind of anti-war photography.
Walter Kleinfeldt wasn't the only soldier whose loss of innocence was captured in a photograph. Michael Smallcombe has come to the battlefields with historian Richard van Emden to find out more about this photograph that his grandfather William took during the Battle of the Somme. It's a story that begins in this muddy field, above a feature known to the soldiers who fought here as Wedge Wood.
We're here because on the 3rd of September 1916, William went over the top in one of the sort of defining moments of his life. The Bristol zone were up here on the ridges here, just over here in their trenches, and they were to come down straight across here and head towards Wedgwood. As they come down this slope here, they're enfiladed by machine guns from the right here, from Germans up at a farm on the ridge, from over there, from the trenches over there. I mean, you can see how exposed they are all the way down here.
No, it's quite shocking, really.
And of course, we're here because of the significance of that one photograph, that picture of a grave. You know, it's terribly, terribly important to William. I'll show you pretty much where I believe it was taken.
Against the odds, William made it across this field and into Wedge Wood. But nearly 400 of the Bristol pals had been killed or wounded in the attack. Many of those who died had no known grave. But thanks to William Smallcombe, one did, at least for a while. And it was somewhere in here.
William was here, and this is where one of his really close friends, Ernest Fry, was killed, and where your grandfather buried him. And then he took out the camera and took this photograph of his grave.
Right.
And he felt that it was important to him to, you know, in the middle of this battle or shortly after, when he's still in grave danger, to take his camera out and take this photograph.
And did he know Ernest Fry's family?
Yes, he did, yes. In his service book, there is the full address. So he was in contact with their family.
So this could have been a record for their benefit as much as his.
I suspect, absolutely. Yeah. This was to show the family that their son had had a decent burial.
Yeah.
As the war continued, Ernest Fry's grave was lost. But William's photograph remains as a permanent reminder of the sacrifice his battalion made that day. And the photograph is significant for another reason too.
From the pictures we have, this does seem that this is the last picture that your grandfather took, not only on the Somme, but during the Great War.
So it seems by then he'd just had enough.
I think he'd had a bellyful, yeah, absolutely.
The fact that William didn't want to take any more photographs is not unusual, as the horrors of war began to wipe away the sense of adventure the soldiers once had.
By the end of the Battle of the Somme, private photography is increasingly rare. You really get the impression that men no longer see this as the adventure that they had embarked upon. Now, I'm not saying these men were disillusioned, I'm not saying these men lacked morale, but the last thing they wanted to do was to take photographs to remind themselves of the terrible images that they were witnessing every day.
The following morning, Michael Smallcombe returned to Wedge Wood, the place where his grandfather fought and would never talk about. William might have lost his love of photography here, but there was one image that Michael wanted to capture.
The resonance that comes from knowing that my grandfather was here, a man I knew very well, as he came here as a young man under fire, that his best friend was killed here. You know, it makes the place very special. And hopefully, even if the photograph doesn't show that, it will show it to me when I take it home.
Almost 100 years ago, William Smallcombe and Walter Kleinfeld were enemies who fought on these battlefields. Both volunteer soldiers and keen photographers, they had at times been less than 2 miles apart. Today, their ancestors are meeting up.
Kleinfeld, it's really nice to meet you. I'm so pleased you're here. Yeah. Shall we go inside?
Michael and Volkmar want to compare the photos their forebears took.
Seht mon père, das ist mein Vater.
Ja.
17 Jahre alt.
17?
Il a 17 ans.
Yeah. 17 years old, yes.
Trägt die Munitionskisten zu der Kanone durch den Schützengraben.
Right.
Bei Pozières.
By Pozières, right, yeah. And it's just 17 in a trench carrying a munitions basket. I don't know what it's called, a carrier, to say.
Yes.
I mean, this is my grandfather, mein Großvater, also in a trench with his machine gun. And he's a bit older, he's 20, 22, but they're so similar, both without helmets, before helmets came in. 2 young men sent to war. Well, they volunteered, but just standing in trenches the opposite sides of each other.
Mike, hier hat mein Vater 3 Freunde, 3 friends.
3 friends of your father's. Ah, yeah.
Fotografiert, ja, im Schützengraben. Sie sehen alle ganz fröhlich, sie lachen. Sie sind aber auch in einer tödlichen Gefahr.
Yeah.
Vielleicht wissen Sie das nicht.
Well, it's so similar. You know, we both have your father's pictures and my grandfather's pictures of groups of friends. And here's his friends, all looking happy, relaxed, probably before they'd had a chance to see the horror that they were going to go through.
Ja, es ist eine Parallele.
Very, very similar, yes, yes. These people are enemies who are trying to kill each other, really. But look, they're the same. It's just groups of friends, that's all they are, just young men.
The similarities in the photographs taken by William and Walter are striking. And the parallels are seen in all photos taken by soldiers of both sides during the war. There's a preoccupation with friends and colleagues, an intimacy born out of camaraderie. There's a pride in the weapons of war, and a fascination with the often surreal landscape around them. And in William and Walter's case, both men photographed the tragedy too.
Das ist ein sehr trauriges Bild. Es ist ein Soldat unter einem Kruzifix. Man kann nicht erkennen, ob es ein deutscher Soldat ist oder ein französischer oder ein englischer. Ist eigentlich auch egal. Es ist eine Anklage gegen den Krieg und wie unnötig er ist, denn irgendeine Familie wartet auf ihn, dass er nach Hause kommt.
For a boy of 17 to take that picture, I think is amazing, really. It's a very powerful image, and it's sort of slightly similar to this because we have here a crucifix, and this is the grave of my grandfather's best friend who was killed, and he buried him, made this crucifix of shells. Having done that, he then took out his camera and took a picture of the grave.
Und diese Männer von damals hätten Freunde sein können, so wie wir heute. Aber sie mussten Krieg machen gegeneinander. Und eigentlich wussten sie nicht, warum.
Walter Kleinfeld died when Volkmar was still a boy, so he was never able to ask his father about the war, or talk about their mutual love of photography. But finding the glass plates he left behind has helped to shed new light on the man he never really knew. Before making the journey home, there's one more place that Volkmar wants to visit: the largest German war cemetery on the Somme. It's a chance for him to reflect on his father's experiences, and of course the extraordinary photographs he took during the war. A permanent reminder of what was supposed to be a young boy's great adventure.
Am beeindruckendsten finde ich das Bild mit dem Kruzifix, vor dem ein toter Soldat liegt. Das ist für mich eine Anklage. Einfach eine Anklage gegen Krieg und Gewalt. Ich hoffe, dass es eine Mahnung ist. Dass sowas nie mehr wieder passieren wird.